HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Gulf, a Novel, by Belle Boggs, read by Amanda Dolan. And beside all this, between us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which would pass from hence to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from thence. Luke chapter 16, verse 26. Part 1. 1. The applications arrived, first in a trickle that Marianne could have read in an afternoon, then, all at once, in alarming, mailbox-stuffing sheaves. She spent all day avoiding them, swimming in the Gulf of Mexico instead, or reading the stubby, water-damaged Judith Krantz and Stephen King novels she borrowed from the paneled wood study. The applications covered every horizontal surface in her room: the oak veneer bureau, the top of the boxy, old-fashioned television, the round formica dinette table. They splayed across the second double bed's glossy navy and orange bedspread and blocked the heating and air vents that jutted out below the heavy floral curtains. They were Christian poems and stories and novels, or rather, the novels and stories and poems of Christians, and Marianne could hardly bear to look at them, much less read more than a page or two at a time. First off, a good number of them had been printed on pastel paper, pinks and blues and yellows and creams, Easter egg colors, baby blanket colors, 3-pack of panties colors, clashing, in their ever-growing stacks, with her room's dark and bright 70s decor, the grainy wood furniture, and the demented cabbage roses on the upholstery. And they smelled. Some smelled like talcum powder, and others like a cloying, familiar perfume. Many like menthol cigarettes. Together, the smells blended into a noxious, headache-inducing sweetness that drove Marianne outside, into the hazy light of Florida's late summer. The Genesis Inspirational Writing Ranch, or the Ranch for short, suggestive of a mix of industry and ease, Republicans and wealth, was a collection of white stucco buildings set back from the road and obscured by a stand of live oaks with twisted gray trunks and dusty rubbery leaves. It had 2 long rows of guest rooms, perpendicular to the beach, behind a central building, which had since been turned into the common areas, a room for pool and darts, a library, a caterer's kitchen. These would comprise the school's office and dining hall, its spaces for readings and public functions. There were 2 large rooms in a single building, and a smaller cabana near the water that would serve as classrooms. The grounds included a kidney-shaped pool, a sliver of beach, a garden, but groundskeeping, or any other kind of upkeep, had not been a recent priority. Broken things: the pool filter, some of the air conditioning units, most of the mini-fridges, had gone unfixed, while everything else took on an air of seaside decay. Screen doors made an uneven seal with the rooms. Giant bugs lurked in corners. Almost every room had a spreading stain on the ceiling, marking the many places where the roof shingles had dislodged. Outside, vicious sandburrs crept onto every footpath, and the statues in the garden, a collection of half-naked nymphs and satyrs, thoroughly unsuitable for a Christian writing ranch, groped each other in long tufts of switchgrass. This was a bad idea, she told Eric over Skype, her laptop screen angled to show a recently scrubbed fridge and a towering pile of manuscripts. Here is what you should do. Sell this place for the land, then refund all these application fees. Eric Osborne, her best friend, ex-fiance, and business partner, had recently abandoned her for the United Arab Emirates, where he had a semester-long gig teaching fiction. Marianne pictured him lazily eating figs and pomegranates, sunning himself next to a pool uncontaminated by algae or raccoons. Skype's slight delay, made worse by the way the internet here cut in and out, gave Eric's normally calm and reassuring voice an annoyed and impatient edge. Everything is mortgaged. We need to make money with what we have. Plus, the screen froze for a moment. Where will you go? Maybe Dubai, she said, squinting at the screen. The room behind Eric's head glowed with an opulent golden light. She could see a bookcase filled with leather-bound volumes and a sparkling chandelier. What kind of a fool did Eric think she was? Do you know what I found in that mini-fridge behind me? Trust me, he said, and the screen froze again. You wouldn't like it here. A condom, she said, full of sand. I thought it was a penis, and I screamed, and there was no one here to hear me. Also, the applications, she said, putting her eye up close to the camera so that all he could see of her was a big, staring eye. They are crazy. How many? 123, she said. But I haven't gotten the mail today, or yesterday. She groaned and lay back on the bed, remembering the last time she'd neglected the mail. The mailman had simply left a stack of envelopes on the ground. There are bound to be some good ones, he said. In a sample that large, some interesting ones. Have you read them all? Yes, she said. No. The day before, she'd tried to read a few, but stopped after coming across a series of poems that had been conceived both in manuscript length and creativity of the punishments inflicted upon sinners, as a contemporary inferno. Don't worry about cleaning fridges or fixing stuff. Mark is working on getting some people out for that. Just read, interview the teachers, and I'll be there in December to help you make the final decisions. Tell him to get the pool fixed, she said. Eric was never able to talk long, and she pictured him logging off to take his students, demure, coal-eyed women, on coffee dates where they asked him about their manuscripts, which he would have mistaken for good because they described a world so foreign and because the women themselves were so pretty, while Marianne scrubbed odoriferous mini-fridges and took notes on poems. Poems about serial killers. Just a month ago, Marianne had her own place in Brooklyn, a miraculously cheap railroad apartment on the top floor of a 4-story walk-up in the treeless and newly trendy neighborhood of Greenpoint. Not that she cared about trends, and she would have preferred some trees. Just the cost of things, which needed to be bargain basement low. Marianne wasn't cheap. She was just a poet. Really? She thought each year at tax time, totaling the measly grant or teaching payments she'd collected. She felt like someone on a calorie-restricted diet, looking over a list of what she'd eaten in a week. Shock and a little pride that she was even still alive. It was, in its way, the life she'd imagined for herself. Growing up in rural Virginia, the sparsely furnished apartment, the neighborhood buzzing with unfamiliar languages, Polish, mostly, but also Russian and Spanish. The clacking of grocery and laundry carts along the street, a job she didn't have to go to every day, time, hers alone, for writing. Her mother, an art teacher at the local high school, had fed Marianne this vision when she was very young, with books like This is New York and Eloise, and later with stories of her own time at the new school, studying painting. Every artist requires a New York experience, Teresa used to say, her soft coastal Virginia accent mixing with a slight Yankee nasality. For Marianne's 5th birthday, she'd given her a heavy glass snow globe with a pewter cityscape and had pointed out the crowded together landmarks, the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, Central Park. Though Marianne couldn't draw or paint or act or sing, she had loved books and words even before she could read, and was relieved to learn that writing, too, was an art that could provide you some entrance to that fabled city, some reasons for being there. But those reasons, in her 34th year, were beginning to dry up like the slowly evaporating water in her snow globe. Her mother died before Marianne made it to the city, and she was no longer so sure she was honoring her memory by living there. Yes, she'd been the recipient of various grants, had published a chapbook, and was working on a full-length manuscript of poems, but her career had not exactly taken off. She took her turns reading to dispiritingly small crowds at coffee shops. At the post-high school level, she could only get hired to teach remedial composition at vocational schools. Unlike her mother, who met Marianne's father in town for an academic conference, in a seedy East Village bar, she had not found love. Or else, and maybe this was worse, she'd found it and had thrown it away. Even her neighborhood, never the bustling, glittering, taxi-crowded place of her childhood imagination, was not what it had been when she moved there. She watched its best features disappear. The brutal but effective Russian estheticians, the Italian bakeries where everything tasted of amaretto, the bocce courts with shuffling men and guayaberas and straw hats. Now, androgynous 20-somethings walked their dogs across the bocce courts. Whimsical boutiques lined even the dingiest blocks, and you were lucky to get a tepid facial for less than $100. And yet, the harshness of New York, heavy winter snows, hot summers, human feces on the subway, felt unabated to Marianne. But as long as she had her apartment, she told herself, she could stay. Then, one afternoon, in early August, she got the letter from her landlord that she'd long feared was coming. Her building was being turned into condos, which the current tenants could buy instead of rent. The landlord referred to the condo sales as an exciting opportunity, except in his haste or lack of English fluency, he'd written exiting opportunity, which, given the anticipated cost of the condos, not mentioned in the letter, Marianne supposed it was. On this very same day, at this very same moment, in fact, that she was learning of her impending homelessness, Eric called Marianne with his news. She'd come in from a walk in 100-degree heat, ripped open and read the letter, and heard the strident, old-fashioned ring of her telephone, 4 floors above. She ran to get it in case it was her landlord, calling to say that she could stay. She was breathing hard, holding the torn envelope and badly spelled letter in her hands as she told Eric what it said. "That's terrible," he agreed. "But you had to have known it was coming." He'd moved away from the city years ago, back to Charlotte, where he'd planned to make the advance on his 2-book deal last as long as possible. But he'd gotten married instead, not to Marianne, and bought a ring and a house, and then gotten divorced and found himself teaching English at a local high school, hard up enough to hire someone without a license. The things that happened to him there, insults hurled like chairs, followed sometimes by actual chairs, eventually led him to sign on to the job in Dubai. He had yet to write the 2nd book. "I thought I had another year at least," she said, scanning the letter again. She turned on the box fan in her kitchen window and took in a great, vibrating lungful of air. Would she ever find another apartment with a window that so perfectly fit a box fan? "It says I have to move out by September 15. That's 15 days into my new lease. I already signed it. I was about to send it back. Doesn't that count that I signed it?" "This is perfect, actually," Eric was saying over the roar. "Perfect timing. Thanks for your concern. No, really," he said. He explained things slowly, savoring the story like a person talking himself into something. In July, a large brown envelope had come in the mail for him. Inside, Eric found a long, handwritten letter, rubber-banded atop a thick stack of papers. The deed to a seaside Florida motel his great-aunt Frances closed down years ago. Eric began to read from his aunt's letter, in a quavering drawl. "I always thought the property could be used for something more creative than a place for beach bums to watch television, which was all the imagination my late husband could muster. I'm too old to take this on, but I can finance it." "Don't do the voice, Eric. The voice is weird." He continued. "It would bring me the greatest pleasure to help my nephews begin what I'm sure would be a successful and personally rewarding business venture. She wants us to start a school, Marianne. A school for writing." Well, congratulations, Marianne said, peering again at the letter in her own hands. I don't see how you turn a motel into a school, or what any of this has to do with my situation, or for that matter, how you and your brother will possibly run a school together. Eric's brother, Mark, was an investment banker who'd moved from Charlotte to an apartment downtown, just a few blocks from Ground Zero. Marianne had met him exactly once, at a trader's bar with bras hanging from the ceiling. That's the thing, he's just helping with the business side. I told Frances I need help, obviously. Teachers and an administrator to start off, and she's willing to invest. He paused. She's willing to pay your salary to run it. My salary? To run a school? There are some details we have to work out. She wants it to be a place for Christian writers, but that's perfect, isn't it? It's what we always talked about. Eric, it's what we always joked about. There's a difference. I told her that you had this exact same idea years ago, he said. That's why she wants you to be the administrator, the director. This was the business they'd imagined together in grad school, after too many scotches for Eric and too many mojitos for Marianne. A low-residency Master of Fine Arts program for evangelical Christians. The idea first came to her after she'd gotten a scholarship to a workshop on formal poetry at a little college in Pennsylvania. Tuition was over $2,000, and the workshop had attracted more than a few Christian poets who'd flown in from all over the country. They'd been good workshop participants, polite and deferential, dutifully taking copious notes about their poems. Though they were better dressed and more formally educated than the evangelical Christians Marianne had grown up with, she recognized the same placid countenances, self-satisfaction masquerading as serenity. During a discussion of process, Marianne had been surprised and a little horrified to discover that many of them wrote more than one poem a day. That was years ago, and the evangelicals, it seemed, had more and more to say. In Marianne's hometown, religious signs, haphazardly stenciled onto primer-painted plywood, began to appear by the roadside, along with political messages, mostly veiled threats against President Obama. Letters to the editor, which frequently invoked God, now took up 2 whole pages of their tiny weekly paper. In many parts of the country, it was okay now to question anything put forth by science, evolution, climate change, black holes, as an attack on God. And they had money. You could turn on any television set to see as much. The motel was on the Gulf, Eric was telling her, with a pool and a sculpture garden designed by his aunt. It was near Sarasota, a haven for artists of all kinds. What could be more inspirational to a community of inspirational writers? But that was a joke, Marianne said, twisting the coiled black phone cord around her arm. A joke about taking money from Christians, which I'm all about, but it was a joke. Think about it, Eric said. You're getting kicked out of your apartment? Where else will you go? You wouldn't have to teach. I'd have to teach Christians for 2 weeks at a time, he said, and it wouldn't be Christians necessarily. We could sell it as a place to work on inspirational writing. Inspirational writing. Marianne scraped a kitchen chair across the linoleum and sat down near the fan. She'd found the chair on the street and always meant to fix it up. Paint the rusty legs a cheerful color. Replace the cracked vinyl seat. It was absurd to think that someone with so little follow-through, someone who couldn't even do minor DIY projects or pay her bills on time, would be successful at running a school. Right, said Eric, apparently taking her silence for interest. It's really popular right now. It has been for years, especially the Christian market, and no one is capitalizing on that. We would be the first. Listen to you, she said. Capitalize. Selling. We didn't go to school to learn to sell our work. I didn't anyway. Clearly. I went to school because it was the best way to avoid ever having a real job, or so I thought, said Eric. And so did you. You could finish the Ugly Bear list, Think about the inspiration you'd have." Marianne felt a little electrical jolt at hearing her book in progress named. This book hardly anyone knew about but Eric. It had been in progress for a couple of years now, since the earliest days of the Tea Party, but wasn't close to done. The title came from a private saying, passed down from her grandmother to her mother. You wouldn't want to be on her ugly bear list. And referenced all the people and movements and decisions that made Marianne's blood pressure rise. Climate change deniers, racists and gun nuts and abortion foes. The NRA as a whole, big tobacco, Republican legislators back home who sold out the coast, stingy school board members who wouldn't take government money for a free school breakfast program, members of her own extended family who still loved that spunky former governor from Alaska. A shit list, a first against the wall list, an accounting of all the people who'd one day have to pay, but also an examination of the incomprehensibility of those people's minds and the fear it created, the bears gnawing away inside your mind. The way its existence changed you, made you vigilant and suspicious. She'd barely worked on it since starting her new job, a teaching gig at PS 150 in Brownsville, where she tutored kids in writing and sometimes taught poetry. Last school year, she taught 3 days a week, and summer school wasn't full-time either. But the long commute and the intensity of routinely performing her own incompetence had left her little energy or motivation to write, which had come to feel like a private admission of defeat. "You're still working on it, right? Wouldn't this be the perfect place to finish?" Marianne lifted the sticky hair off her neck and knotted it loosely into a bun. 3 of her students lived in homeless shelters all year, and her baby sister was a registered Republican. "Yeah," she said, "still working. How old is your aunt? Does she have all her faculties?" "Great aunt," Eric said. "Somewhere north of 80, but sharp as a tack, really. You should see. Would she be looking over our shoulders all the time?" "No, she's got a full life over at the retirement home," he said. "She said in her letter that she trusts my good judgment about teaching and writing. She's getting older. She wants a legacy. We send her some of the students' work, invite her to a few readings. What if the students aren't any good?" Marianne said. "What if they're terrible? Unteachable?" "Of course they won't all be good. Were all your classmates at NYU good?" "No," she admitted, thinking of a beautiful heiress with an exceptional coat wardrobe who shrugged off the table's harsh criticism each week, leaving the bar they convened in after class for dates with various washed-up celebrities. Marianne had liked reading her poems mostly for the experience of looking into a rich person's life and point of view, but she'd agreed with the class consensus that they were probably not publishable. There was a whole series, for example, written from the perspective of a variety of interchangeable Filipina maids. "I guess not. Did that make it right, though, for NYU to take their money? Our money?" "That's a very paternalistic attitude, Marianne. I'm surprised," Eric scolded. "We could find the next Manny Abrams." "Who?" "Manny Abrams, the Holocaust survivor who wrote the best-selling memoir about having a heart attack and meeting Jesus, Muhammad, and the Buddha, and how they all agreed that Jesus was the one. He was on the Today Show. Frances told me about him. She read him in her book club." "That sounds terrible," Marianne said. "Was it written well?" "Of course not. That's the point," Eric said. "This stuff doesn't have to be written well or be believable. People don't care about that. It's like television. Frances has this idea that these people, these undiscovered raw talents, are everywhere." "But I thought you were going to Dubai. I thought you were waiting on your passport. Why don't you have a passport anyway?" Even Marianne had a passport, obtained after a solid day of line standing on J Street. She'd gotten it in case the law professor she'd been half-heartedly dating wanted to take her on an elaborate, spur-of-the-moment trip. "I am going," he said. "That's the thing. It's 4 months. You could go now, get situated, sit on the beach, read applications, meet with Frances. Then we could start in the spring. or the summer. "Applications?" Marianne said. The phone cord made a tourniquet around her purpled arm. "We don't even have something for people to apply to. Also, I have a lease. I put an ad up 2 weeks ago, and we already have 35 applications, $40 each. My brother is taking care of the business licenses and tax stuff." "Your brother?" "We went over the plan, and he thinks it's a winner. He even talked Francis into giving each of us a profit share in the school. He wants to take you to dinner, go over some things." "I have a lease," I said. She thought that maybe she could fight for her apartment, deny the existence of the impending condos. "I'm sorry to tell you this, Marianne, but your apartment is a dump, and they're not going to honor your lease." "I'm sorry to tell you this, Eric, but your brother is a stockbroker, and your great-aunt is crazy." He was silent for a while, and Marianne regretted what her voice implied. He was touchy about his brother and his success, and maybe he was sensitive about Francis, too. She turned off the box fan to hear whether Eric was still on the line. As its rotation slowed, she saw that the blades were gray with city grime. Eric was right. Her apartment was a dump. "What about my sister?" she said finally. "I invited her to New York for Thanksgiving." "Thanksgiving is 4 months away," Eric said. Marianne didn't point out how early she had to make invitations, now that Ruth was married. "Did she say she was coming?" "No," she admitted. Her sister hadn't made any promises. "Invite her to Florida," Eric said. "Where would she rather be anyway, Brooklyn or a Christian writing school in Florida?" "I don't know," she said. "You do know," Eric said softly. His voice on the telephone, a gentle drawl, had always been irresistible to her. "What's keeping you there?" Marianne thought of her things. What would she take with her, fleeing the city? Some poetry books, her clothes and shoes, the small framed watercolors by her mother, the snow globe, a brown pottery mug that once held her mother's brushes. 10 years in the city, and almost everything of value she had was something she'd brought with her, something from home. She'd thought years ago that she could bring Ruth, too. "You said your aunt was an artist, a sculptor?" "You'll love her," Eric said. "And your sister can visit you in Florida. She'll love it," Eric said, with so much certainty that Marianne believed him. "Tell me more," she said, "about my salary." She should have stayed, defended the apartment, piled her sparse furniture at its doorway. If her landlord kicked her out, put her belongings on the street, she could have dragged a sleeping bag and her few belongings down to Zuccotti Park, started some new poems, put her middle finger up if Mark walked by. In Florida, she watched CNN's mocking footage of the Occupy protesters in their zombie face paint and Uncle Sam drag, then found an internet live stream that told a different story. Marches and daily meetings, vegetarian meals, people who spoke eloquently of the debt that broke them, their families. She imagined herself as one of them, organizing the books in the People's Library, donating her own. If anyone asked, she could tell her story. $42,000 in student loan debt, part-time work in a high-poverty school, newly homeless. "Join us!" the protesters chanted at an open-air tour bus plastered with Lion King advertising. The tourists leaned over the railing, snapping photos. No one got off the bus. Would Marianne have disembarked from her own comfortable perch? Would she have camped in a public park, shared food, brushed her teeth in a water fountain? Maybe not, she thought, but she kept the live stream rolling. Meanwhile, the applications continued to pile up, in high, wavering towers. Besides, she had run out of Krantz and King. Her own book collection, mailed from Brooklyn, had not yet arrived, and watching grainy protest footage in an abandoned motel made her feel guilty and also like a squatter. She turned the sound off on her laptop and began to read applications seriously. Choosing the first one was hardest. A slim pack.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?